Comics, also known as graphic novels and graphic narratives, are a fairly recent development compared to fables, fairy tales, and poems. They were invented in the 20th century as part of our mass culture, though they have roots in far older traditions, including illustrated books. Different people have defined comics in different ways, but I am sure you all know what they look like. Pictures, one after another, that tell a story. A series of pictures that tell a narrative. Some comics don't include language, they are wordless, but the vast majority combine words and images to create their stories. The images are rarely mere illustration of the text. Rather, they are an integral part of the telling of the story and the creation of its meaning. We saw that this was the case in several children's books, illustrated children's books, where the illustrations were part of the meaning of the text. But it's not always the case in children's books. In the best comics, words and images work together to create the meaning of the comic book or to affect the reader. Because graphic novels contain less words than normal books, and because they started out as a part of the world of mass production, there are a number of prejudices and stereotypes about comic books. One is that they are kind of trash, unworthy of serious attention. In the past decade, serious writers and artists have dedicated their time to this medium, to the medium of comics, and produced many complex texts in comics. They have received some of the most important literary prizes and received attention from reviewers and academics. These critics and academics show how comics can have much worth beyond just entertainment, and that it's worth reading them again and again like other works of literature or other important works of art. Art Spiegelman's Mouse, the story of the author's father's survival in Auschwitz, was written with an ambition of reaching a large audience and actually received the Pulitzer. It was certainly not just for entertainment. It deals with serious matters such as the Holocaust, growing up with trauma in the family, and how can an artist and writer depict unspeakable events like the Holocaust and trauma. It has been written about, Maus has been written about by many scholars in fields like art history, literature, and Holocaust studies. You can't look at it and say this is just entertainment, this is just trashy books. A second prejudice is that comics are only about superheroes like Superman, or only about talking animals, maybe like Garfield. While a lot of comics today are about superheroes, many throughout comics history have dealt with other things. Even popular comics can be the detective, romance, or horror genres without any superpowers in sight. More artistically ambitious comics can deal with anything really, and they are often very realistic. So, for example, Mouse corresponds with the talking animals genre of comics by depicting Jews as mice and Germans as cats. But it is very clear that the novel Mouse speaks about real people, Art and his father and the rest of their family. Sometimes Spiegelman depicts himself not as a mouse, but as a man wearing a mouse mask to remind us that behind the images of the animals that he draws in the comics, there are real human beings. The last stereotype is that comics are just for children. This is not true at all. It is true that many comics were always meant for kids and at least read by kids. That's why I think it does make sense to dedicate a unit to comics in a children's literature course, like I'm doing. Still, from their very beginning, some comics were not meant for children at all. They contain adult themes like sex and extreme violence, or use language that would be above children's head. Don't think that it's okay for a child to read a comic book just because it is a comic book. Some are for adults. The more recent artistically ambitious comics assume a totally mature audience, even if some of them would be appropriate for teenagers. Anyways, they are not just meant for children. Mouse, for example, is now taught in some junior and high schools as part of language learning literature or a unit about the Holocaust. Though I have to say, as someone who only read these novels as an adult, I suspect that younger people may miss out on some important nuances in the text and have a very superficial reading of it. To sum up, comics can be complex works of art, combining words and images to tell us a story. They are not just superhero stories for kids. That said, I think comics are great for children, and I would encourage you to use them in your classroom and recommend them as reading material. Why? First, comics can be very empowering for slower readers. You know, some kids, they learn how to read and quickly become very fluent in it. Some kids stay very slow readers, certainly in a second language, like most of your students are going to be. With a graphic narrative, there will almost always be less words to read on each page than in a normal novel. The sense of getting through pages and reading whole books is in a matter of days rather than in a matter of weeks can give a great boost to children who are having trouble finding their flow in reading. The combination of words and images can also facilitate comprehension. It can also help students learn to pause after they read something and think about it. So you're looking at the image, you're also thinking about what you just read. Something that actually the faster readers forget to do, and they can fly through a written piece without letting it sink in. Comics are a great opportunity to practice visual interpretation skills in tandem at the same time with reading comprehension. That is making room for different skill sets, both visual and linguistic comprehension. Knowing graphic narratives can open up avenues for creativity and cooperation. Thus, children who are stronger at drawing can cooperate with those who are better at making up stories or at writing dialogue and make comics together. So I hope I convince you that it's worth getting to know comics better. In the next video, I will discuss some basic issues on how comics operate and work and what to notice when you are reading them.